Well, welcome back, everyone, for our final panel of discussion. I want to thank the entire staff of CMS for putting on yet another extraordinary event. This one, I think, that is touching our hearts in a way that is extraordinary. And I want to thank everyone for being here. In a lot of ways, this feels like a family reunion. And, you know, and a sorrowful reason, but a lot of joy, times we've all shared together, times that we shared with Juan. And so it's really a humbling experience for me to be here and to speak with Esther, Olavarria, and Cecilia Muñoz, both of whom knew and worked with Juan for many years longer than I. As Esther, as I'm sure you all know, spent a decade handling immigration issues for Senator Kennedy on the Senate Judiciary Committee before serving in the Obama administration, both in the Department of Homeland Security and in the White House. Cecilia Muñoz spent 20 years with National Council of La Raza before working as director of the White House Domestic Policy Council for President Obama. As a MacArthur Foundation employee, I also have to note that Cecilia is a MacArthur Fellow, something we're very proud of. And so each of us had the opportunity and privilege to work with Juan Osuna from different locations, perspectives, and of course, many of you did too. And we will open up this conversation for those of you who would like to share your own memories and reflections after a short while. I've tried to take note of who has said throughout the day that they would like to do that, but the mics will be open to everyone. As the three of us prepared for this discussion on a phone call, we found each other completing each other's sentences, all coming up with the same words to describe Juan and our reverence and our admiration for him. A devoted public servant, a man of the highest integrity, a person who respected the law and simultaneously sought to elevate the humanity of everyone touched by the law. I think my first exposure to Juan was his opinion in matter of SK on material support for terrorism, where I was astounded and so excited to see a BIA member write an opinion that raised up those issues and gently nudged the government to do the right thing. Juan was a leader who supported his teams, wherever he worked, wherever they were, and who had the incredible admiration and loyalty of all those who worked with him, some of whom, of course, are here today. Don spoke a little bit earlier about how Juan showed respect to all of those he encountered, whether he agreed with their opinions or not, and did a very eloquent job of representing Attorney General Sessions' views when we clearly knew that Juan disagreed with some of those. I also wanted to note somewhat humorously that Juan was also respected by those who didn't share his opinions. When he was appointed to be the head of EOIR, David North of the Center for Immigration Studies wrote a column in which he referred to Juan as a, quote, sober careerist, and much more of a lawyer than a politician. I happened to see this, and I sent it to Juan, and I said, how do you feel about being called a sober careerist? And he said, that's hilarious, but at least he said I was sober. And so I think we will touch on all of these characteristics and traits, all of the things we admired in our conversation today. And with that, I will hand it over to Esther or Cecilia, whoever would like to go first.
Well, I'll get started. Yes, thank you. As Tara just mentioned, Cecilia and I, as many of you in this room, had the good fortune to know Juan for many, many years. And in my case, as a trusted colleague and just a very dear, irreplaceable friend. I don't remember when I first met Juan, but I feel like he was in my life always from the time I got to Washington in 1998. I probably met him first through Wendy, but it seemed like our lives always intersected, and I could always confide in him when I was in government and he was in government, and also count on his friendship throughout. Many of you already in this room today have described Juan's incredible attributes much more eloquently than I can even begin to do. and his experiences as a true public servant, a unique, again, irreplaceable public servant. So I'm just going to touch on two more recent experiences that I had with Juan when I was at the White House working with Cecilia on the immigration reform bill, and then also at DHS. Let me start with the 2013 bill. When the Gang of Eight started working on that bill, the administration became involved to provide support in a quiet way. But we created this war room in the Senate.
You didn't call it a war room.
Yeah.
That was forbidden.
Yes, but that's what we called it inside. And we worked out of the vice president's office in the Dirksen building. And as part of that effort, we identified the best, most trusted people in each department of the government, at state, at labor, at commerce, and at justice. And some of them were political appointees, but some of them were career public servants like Juan. And in Juan, we knew we had the best representative for the department, for the Justice Department. And during that time, as we were going through the markup in the Judiciary Committee, and then when the bill went to the floor, we had to react to hundreds of amendments and analyze them and develop our positions on these amendments very, very quickly. As many of you who have worked with the Justice Department, you know they don't work quickly on anything, except more recently, where we have learned that they can do so. But Juan was able to go back and talk to the various divisions at Justice, the Civil Rights Division, the Criminal Division, the Civil Division, and many others that had very, very, very different views on these amendments, on policies, and come up with a consensus view, go through to overcome incredible roadblocks and do so in just really quick time, and then come back to us with that consensus view. And then we had to look at, okay, where was State Department on this? Where was Labor on this? And of course, they were in very different positions also, and then help us come together with what was the administration's position on all of this. And sometimes we could agree with what Juan came forward with, and sometimes we couldn't, and he completely understood. And then his job was then to go back to the Department of Justice and explain to the Department of Justice what the administration's position was going to be. And he did it with such incredible skill, such incredible knowledge, and just collaboration, and always stayed calm, never lost his cool, and just incredibly calm in a very, very chaotic environment, and was a role model for many others working there during this really intense, wonderful period, which unfortunately didn't in the end have good results, but and so is the nature of our work. The second issue, where we saw Juan's skills as a communicator and as an effective public servant, I was at DHS for a good long time, and most recently working for Secretary Jay Johnson. And during countless meetings, we would sit in with Secretary Johnson and the leadership, especially at ICE and CBP. And ICE and CBP had loved to disparage the Department of Justice and blame all of the immigration system's woes on the Department of Justice and the incompetence of the immigration judges. And Juan was often blamed in the room. So we, Ali and I, thought it's time for Secretary Johnson to meet Juan Osuna and let Juan Osuna explain the immigration court system to the secretary. And the secretary was brand new to immigration, but came at it with an open mind, very, very eager to learn. So Juan was able to come in and skillfully explain the importance of the immigration system, the importance of legal representation, the things that we have heard of throughout the day, the importance of legal representation, the importance of an independent judiciary, the importance of due process, the fact that the Congress had given intense resources to the enforcement branches at DHS and starved the Department of Justice, and that's why you were seeing the bottlenecks that there were. It wasn't because immigration judges were all a bunch of, tree-hugging liberals who wanted to disregard the law and delay the process. Quite the opposite. And he was able to do this in just the Juan-like way that he's able to, well, that you've heard from today from everybody else. And he ended up becoming a very trusted advisor to Secretary Johnson. And whenever Secretary Johnson wanted to know anything about the Department of Justice, that's who he turned to. I think I'll stop there and turn it over to Cecilia.
Thank you. So thanks, first of all, Don, for pulling this together. And I'll just apologize because I'm having the experience of one that I wasn't able to be here all day, and I apologize for that. But in particular, it means that I'm like having the wave of grief that everybody else had this morning. So forgive me for that. So I got to see sort of a little bit the other side of what Esther just described in my own interactions with Secretary Johnson. Because I managed to catch the secretary right after he'd had his first meeting and briefing with Juan Osuna. And the reason I know that is because he called me up and he said, "Hey, have you met this guy from DOJ?" I was like, yeah, I did not confess that. I actually knew Juan, not through work. I knew Juan through Wendy from a bazillion years ago when we worked together at NCLR. That's how long I've known Juan. So I was like, yeah, he's really quite impressive. And the secretary was effusive. He was like, this is an amazing intellect. And he was so impressed with what he knew and so impressed with his integrity. And I thought, well done. But that's the effect that Juan had when he was in the room. So the story I'll tell is, it comes from what was probably the hardest professional experience in my life, which was the summer of 2014, the summer of unaccompanied migrant kids. And, those of you who have served in government in whatever capacity all know that when you're faced with a situation like the one we faced, all terrible. And that's true for any administration, no matter what your motivations are, no matter who's in office. If faced with a situation like that where there are people in desperate circumstances for a variety of reasons, you have a range of options for what you do when you encounter them at the border, and none of them feel particularly satisfying, right? From encountering people and just taking them to the bus station, which is what happens sometimes, to community alternatives to detention, which seem really effective but are hard to do at scale, to ankle bracelets, to detention. And you all know the panoply because we've been dealing with all of this under multiple administrations. The options, none of them feel particularly great. But your job as an official is to sort through them all and figure out what the right course of action is. And your job as a human is to examine your conscience about whether or not you feel good about the choices that you've made. And we were struggling with both of those things, all of us, all the time, every day that summer. And the thing about Juan is when he walks into the Situation Room representing the Department of Justice, there would be a part of me that would go, oh, thank God, Juan's here. So you knew you were going to be getting the best advice from someone with impeccable knowledge of the system, impeccable conscience, and impeccable integrity. All the time, 100% of the time. And so Juan and I, and when you're a political appointee and you're dealing with someone who's a career person, there are rules about what you can and can't say and do. And so Juan and I were in the situation of doing this dance where we knew each other. I knew who he was. He knew who I was. We each knew what the other cared about, and we each had roles to play in that situation. But I could always count on Juan being Juan. And I knew that both in the room and with everybody around, that we would get impeccable advice, which we did. But also periodically, Juan would call and say, "Can I come in for a visit?" And I am wise enough to know to always say yes to that. And we would have these conversations, I don't know how to describe it, they were always 100% appropriate. He never put himself or me in the position of doing anything inappropriate with respect to the relationship between a political appointee and a career official, ever. But he managed to convey what I needed to know without ever once stepping over any lines or without ever once suggesting that I should step over any lines. And it's hard to describe the magic of that. It's really hard to do well. But I walked out of those conversations with real clarity, which is an accomplishment all by itself, because those were really terrible and terrifying decisions. But with real clarity as to how far we could go, what would be most effective, and what we could most square with our consciences, which is an important part of the conversation. He was just about the only person that I could say that about with respect to the really wonderful folks in the career ranks that I worked with. And that's in part because we knew each other from before. And because the only way to say it is each of us knew the other's heart. And wow, is it a wonderful thing when you're facing difficult decisions to know that you're in the room with people whose heart you understand and who understand yours. I could rely on that with Juan. And it made everybody in the room sharper, more effective, but also more connected to that space between what you can do as a government official and what your heart tells you. And those spaces, as we have learned, are pretty important. The only other story I'll tell, and it's a little one, but it has stuck with me. Secretary Johnson so appreciated and respected Juan that when the unaccompanied minors crisis was developing that in May of 2014, the secretary invited the two of us to go with him to McAllen, which we did. So you get on the little Coast Guard plane, and I had to sit right across from the secretary, which means you kind of have to be on best behavior all the time. Mm-hmm. And we went down to the Border Patrol sector and saw what was happening, which is, an extraordinary thing to see with your own eyes, particularly because actually a lot of my assumptions about the way the Border Patrol was likely to be behaving weren't true, I'm proud to say. I don't think they were just on their best behavior because the secretary was there, because they were too overwhelmed. So I have the sense we really did see what was going on. But there are a lot of kids. This was like really at the height when we were out of shelter space. We didn't have enough shelter space for the kids. We were scrambling. It was going to take a while to get to the place where we had sufficient shelter space. So this is when the kids were piling up in the Border Patrol lockups, which are no place for children. And that was the point at which we went ourselves to see what was going on. And again, it was another one of those things that you do as a government official. You have your stoic face on. You're taking in a lot of information. Your head is there along with your heart. You're trying to figure out which pieces of which you want to let show. And Juan and I were both in the position to have conversations in Spanish with the kids, both in the Border Patrol sector. We also visited a shelter. So we're taking in all of this information, and then we get on the plane to go back. And this is, in front of the secretary and other officials, and Juan just looked at me, and all he said was, "That was something." And it was. But that was one of those moments where your head and your heart are both right there in the room, and it's okay because so is Juan's head and his heart right there in the room. And that like whatever decisions you have in front of you, you have the right partner. And that is it's hard to overstate how enormous that is. So those are just two little tidbits. It doesn't feel to me like they begin to do justice to the guy that we're talking about here, but they are things I will carry in my heart always.
Thank you. I think I wanted to highlight a little bit more about that respect for the law, but always looking for opportunities to bring the humanity into implementation of the law, whether within the bounds of the statute or case law, or as I mentioned earlier, a concurrence and a BIA opinion that nudges the government to do everything it can for a person who should not be banned from the United States and their refugee claim or asylum claim. I think we think about the way that within the Department of Justice and EOIR, Juan was able to make all kinds of positive changes with respect to unaccompanied minors cases, special training for judges, special days and special dockets for children so that their cases could be handled more appropriately. Consideration of a framework of best interests for children to be applied in removal proceedings, creation of federally funded programs to screen and offer counsel to children. And of course, we've already talked today about similar programs for the mentally impaired. I think all of that goes to his desire to both look at the efficiency and effectiveness of the courts, but also the ways in which they actually affect people's lives so that everyone could have a free and fair opportunity to seek the kind of protection they were seeking. I thought of this this morning when Deputy Secretary Mayorkas quoted Juan with the line about, now I'm going to get it so I say it right, you can't let the people who step on the flowers slow our journey. And I feel like some of those flowers are being stepped on right now. But we all know that if he were here, he would keep fighting to bring them back, as will we. I think the other point I wanted to raise was this sort of incredibly respectful but deft quality of navigating our government bureaucracies. I think the three of us, certainly many other people here, had the opportunity to have private conversations with Juan about ideas, proposals, legislative drafts. And as Cecilia said, Juan never once acted out of accordance with the agency he served or the lines of authority he followed, but he was always creative, thoughtful, honest, and gave me tremendously valuable advice as at points where Senator Leahy was interested in moving refugee and asylum legislation, just having a better view as to what the Department of Justice might or might not accept, support, endorse, et cetera. And it was always such a joy to me to know that I had one of these meetings with Juan coming up. Actually, special thanks to CMS for often providing opportunities for a side meeting on the edge of a conference or something else. But I think that is an incredible skill that not everyone in government has. To be able to always be completely loyal to the agency and yet look for progress and humane options at every turn. I think if people are ready and would like to start coming up to the mic to share any reflections or thoughts they have, we welcome that. Esther, Cecilia, do you have any other immediate thoughts?
Yes, let me just, a couple thoughts. We've heard just what an incredible public servant Juan was, but in thinking about his legacy, what I think about is Juan as a person and how he was such a wonderful example of leading a full and balanced life. He worked hard, he loved his work, he strove to do good every day through work, but he was also just he loved life as well. And you saw that in the loving husband that he was, and the devoted father that he was to his mother, and the caring brother and uncle that he was, brother to his brother that died, and to his nieces that remained. And you, if you were here this morning, you heard the poem that Ali read today from his niece expressing her love for him, and you could see his love for her. And so I think that is something that we should look at and not lose sight of as many of us continue, or many of you, I'm not in it anymore, but continue to work in this really, really tough field, is to look at the time that Juan made also for family and for friends. I could always count on him to meet me for a drink after a really bad day during family separation, and just pour his heart out, and I could pour my heart out. Or to treat his colleagues from the clerk, secretary, to the person, very high positions in government with respect and with warmth and with compassion. And also the way he just appreciated beauty. If you have ever been to Wendy and Juan's home, he made time to tend to his garden, to water his beautiful orchids, to go bird watching. And I think those are the kinds of things that we all also need to keep in perspective as we continue to do this really hard work, is to make time for beauty, make time for family, make time for friends. The other thing is something that Juan and I had just started to talk about before he died. And it was, we were having conversations about how long it took to do things within the Obama administration. And I'm sure, Cecilia, you would completely agree with me. And just how, and Lucas and I have had these conversations too, and how we tried so hard to build consensus, bring in everybody, talk to everybody, hear all points of view within the government, and then tread carefully and to make sure that, and make sure that all I's were dotted, T's were crossed before we put out a policy. And sometimes, even for the simplest policies, it took us forever to do. And I think if he were here today, he would say, yes, there's a time and place for that, but there's a time and place to act quickly. And I think Wendy and Eleanor, you started to allude to that. And I think when we have a chance to do so again, and God help us, we will, that we need to learn lessons from these last couple of years, and yes, act ethically and legally, be respectful of people's points of views, attempt some consensus, but don't get bogged down in the bureaucracy, and just act more quickly, more boldly, dream big, as someone said earlier today.
Is anyone ready to come up and share? Eleanor looks like she's ready to. Yes, sure. Thanks.
So I guess my perspective on Juan was from the perspective of an NGO advocate. He was the target of our advocacy. But he was always willing to engage and meet with me, with our research fellows, with other NGOs. He was always patient and thoughtful in his responses. When Juan would travel to a conference to speak to the American Bar Association or the American Immigration Lawyers Association, we would corner him in cafes over a meal or a cup of coffee while he was trying to get some work done, and pepper him with more questions. And so that we can make sure and be confident that our recommendations were strong and credible. Even after he left the Department of Justice, Juan continued to share his time and his wisdom with all of us. Juan cared profoundly for due process, access to legal counsel, and fairness. But most of all, he cared about and adored Wendy and his family. Whenever we would corner him, whether it was at a coffee shop in another city he had traveled to, or the last time I actually got to spend quality time with him at a PJ Clark's bar in New York City where he was traveling to speak at something. Much of our conversation and his thoughts and focus were on Wendy and on his nieces and his plans for the future. Like Karen Grisey mentioned earlier, I often find myself thinking I need to get feedback or a reality check from Juan, and so that I know that like what we're thinking about doing or recommending really makes sense. And I find that I continue to talk to him, and I continue really to feel his wisdom and his guidance still. So we miss him profoundly, but he's still with us.
Thank you. Lucas, did you say earlier you want? I don't want to put you on the spot.
Oh, yeah, but I don't know if it's appropriate for this crowd.
All right, you can collect your thoughts, and we'll have Steve go.
Yeah, I want to elaborate on two things that people have already mentioned about Juan. One is as an educator, and one about dedication to Wendy. I feel very fortunate that Cornell Law School is very close to Syracuse University and Syracuse, New York, because that's where Wendy's family is from. And because of that, I was always able to entice Juan and Wendy to come up to Cornell on their way up to Syracuse to see Wendy's relatives. And again, he was very appropriate in what he talked about in those meetings. He never argued against the government, but he was clearly a great motivator. Some of my students became immigration attorneys because of the inspiring talks that Juan gave at Cornell Law School. So I just wanted to share those two small points. Thank you.
All right, so most of what I said, most of what I felt, I said earlier this morning about just my profound respect for Juan in terms of how he navigated both being inside the government and advocating so forcefully for the principles of independence and fairness, while at the same time staying there and engaging with the difficult process of trying to advance those principles. He was also a very experienced, in all those respects, Washington person. When I came to D.C. to serve in the Obama administration, I remember with one of my first dinners with him, first time I saw him was dinner with him. And so I said, this is going to be, I'm very excited. And he said to me, just remember one thing about Washington. Is this okay? And this may be known to many of you, but it was advice to me. The toe you step on today may be connected to the ass you're kissing tomorrow. Juan was smart and funny, and he said it in the driest possible way. So I always think of that.
Okay, so I'll tell my Juan Osuna story. My name is Thomas Ragland. I'm an immigration lawyer here in Washington. But I met Juan when he was at Interpreter Releases, and I was about a year into my job at the BIA, which I joined in 1995 after a year in the immigration court in Boston. And I think Michelle, that might have been her first year too. And Paul Schmidt, who was the chairman that year. Lori Rosenberg was there. It was an exciting time to be at the BIA. But somebody said, you like to write, you like to edit, you really need to go interview for this job at Interpreter Releases, which of course I knew what Interpreter Releases was. So about 6 months into the BIA job, I went and I met with Juan and with Danielle Poland and talked about the job and was very excited about it and got offered the job and turned it down because as little as the government paid, Interpreter Releases paid less, and I had law school loans I had to pay, and so anyway, and also because it was an exciting time to be at the board. As it turns out, Juan didn't stay at Interpreter Releases that much longer, and fortunately, he then left after Wes bought them out, and he came to the board, and we had a chance to work together at the board. And then, of course, I would see him. I then worked at OIL for a while, and then went into private practice, and would continue to see Juan at ALA events or whenever the opportunity arose. And to me, having been in government at Justice for 10 years and having now been in private practice for about 14 years, the value, I think, of seeing it from both sides is invaluable. And I find that in my practice, it's one of the things I admire very much about Juan and about others like Paul Schmidt and others I worked with. The value of being a young staff attorney is somewhere like the board and having your boss, having the head of the agency, having the chairman of the board, whoever it is, get up and give a presentation and say, our job is justice. Our job is due process. Our job is not crank out as many cases as possible. Our job is not efficiency. Our job is not, get rid of the backlog. Our job is to do justice. It really means a lot because it's empowering. It's empowering when you're facing the pressures that EOIR faces and faces ever more to just churn through the cases, to write the decision as quickly as possible, to affirm the IJ. So Juan's contribution to that, to me, was really invaluable. I'm very gratified that there are immigration judges here today. I'm really, as a private immigration lawyer, we spend a lot of time bashing immigration judges, and justifiably in many cases. But having said that, and also being an alumnus of EOIR, the value of having good judges and judges who will sort of maintain their humanity and empathy and commitment to due process and justice, even in the face of having a boss like Jeff Sessions, even in the face of having, terrible case law precedent and the pressures of the job is really invaluable. So I hope that good judges will stay. I hope the good judges, more good judges will come into the courts and to the BIA and that we'll see things turn in the near future, and things will be back on track. It'll be exciting like it was in 1995. So,
Joanne?
Hi, everyone. I'm Joanne Lynn. I'm here today on behalf of me and my partner, Greg Chen. Greg would be here, Wendy, but it's a snow day. And my son's school got canceled, so he's home with my son. Greg got to go to Luis Gutierrez's farewell last night, so I get to come here today to remember Juan well and to be with all of you. So thank you for that. Greg and I first met Juan and Wendy in their home in 2004, and I don't even remember how we got invited there. But Esther was there, Susan Benesh was there. We didn't know that at the time that we were actually invited into a fun party with the immigration bigwigs in Washington. But we had just relocated from the San Francisco Bay Area, and one of my friends, Ann O'Leary, said, "You need to find a way to go work for Esther." So I was like, okay, I'm going to try to find a way to go work with Esther, although that has never actually really happened, but in different ways we have. But I remember Wendy and Juan's beautiful home, your dogs, the warmth of your community, and how we were just instantly welcomed. And so Greg and I made Juan our mentor, even though we never asked him if he would be willing to serve as our mentor. He just became one for us. And I will say the thing that I learned from Juan was that he taught me how to dance quietly. And what I mean by that is, my former employer, the ACLU, often would sue the Justice Department or the Obama administration, and Juan and his colleagues would be on the other side of this. But I'll never forget the work that we, and I'm thinking Tara, when you were still in Leahy's office, that we collectively did around finding and freeing up funds, government funds, to provide for government paid representation for children. And finding a way to do that in a way that kept the story out of the press and out of Republican radar, and finding a way to collaborate with our lobbying work with the appropriators, identifying potential Republican conservative validators who could come to the fore if the issue got public attention and who would be willing to defend that, and working in concert with people inside government. And I think of that as something that even though he didn't tell me how to do it, I learned how to do that dance quietly. And I think about that as a tremendous success story. And Esther, when you were talking about S744, I remember going in before the Senate Judiciary markup and previewing for Juan the slate of amendments that we had been working on with the Senate Judiciary Democrats, amendments that were designed to improve the bill without shaking or disrupting the Gang of Eight agreement. And again, nothing was said that was inappropriate or out of bounds, but just kind of saying, this is what we're planning on doing. Is there a way we can do it together? And finally, I just wanted to say the side of Juan that I think we hold most dear, which I don't even know how it came out, was that Juan is an avid Civil War battle buff, an expert. And my son is too. And so Juan has actually educated us tremendously on Civil War battlefields. And I think it was during one of those moments when I was complaining that my daughter, who's a travel soccer girl, I had to spend the weekend again driving down to Virginia Beach or driving down to Fredericksburg. And Juan started to tell me about the different Civil War battlefields that were only 30 minutes away from each of her games. So over the years, we have visited 7 different battlefields between Pennsylvania and Southern Virginia. And the last battlefield that we visited was actually in Petersburg, outside Richmond. I'll never forget Juan's description of it as, this is the Battle of the Crater. It was featured in the movie Cold Mountain with Jude Law. You've got to go. It was this huge explosion, and again, the Union Army totally, messed it up. And so in early November 2016, I was taking my kids down to North Carolina because we were canvassing in North Carolina because we thought, at that time, everyone said North Carolina was a battleground state. It was in motion. And on the way down, we stopped at Petersburg. And we took out muskets that were made out of newspaper and duct tape. And we charged up those hillsides, reenacting Petersburg. And I only know that because Juan told me about it, and he shared so many other little tidbits from his life that I will just carry with me forever.
So I'm just going to intervene for 1 second, Karen, but I think it's like our conversation about this panel, finishing each other's sentences, using the same words over and over. I think we're experiencing the same thing now. Andy Schoenholtz talked about what an educator Juan was, and Deputy Secretary Mayorkas talked about how he quietly and softly worked within government, so dancing quietly, right? Karen.
Thanks. I'll add just a couple of things to what I said this morning. One of them, more on the official side. I'll speak in my ABA capacity, even though I'm a volunteer and not a staff member there. But in all the time that I knew and worked with Juan in connection with ABA activities, he was so generous with his time, always honest, completely candid. He would show up for any on the record, off the record, program, meeting, whatever it is, and very, very generously shared all his knowledge, his best advice, and echoing something that people said many times today, always was entirely appropriate. Never forgot who his employer was, never forgot where his ultimate loyalties had to lie, but was able to blend, right? How can he be true to that and still try to move forward and collaborate in a heartfelt and honest way? So on behalf of the ABA, I say thank you to Juan for everything he did for us from the 2010 report and beyond. The personal ones, I'll say a couple of things from his very last summer with us. First, in early June of last summer, my mom passed away after a very short illness. And Juan walked that little short journey with me. And he let us know he and Wendy would be coming to the funeral. And on the morning of that, Wendy was ill. And he texted me and said, Wendy can't come, but I'm still coming. And he did. And later, I noticed in the guest book, and this is to speak to Wendy in his heart at all times, he signed the book, Juan Osuna and Wendy Young, even though I knew that Wendy wasn't there and she was ill, but he was, you know, carrying Wendy on that day. The second one is, Don mentioned this morning that he came to CMS to give us a talk after he had left government. That, I think, was in July, maybe around mid-July or so last summer. And he had told me that the only thing he wanted to do after leaving government was spend the whole summer doing nothing, thinking about next steps, going on vacation, clearing his head. And for CMS, he came and talked and shared all of his experience, and then had a lunch with some of us afterwards, talking even more about what possibilities for the future were and where we might go. And again, I found that ultra, ultra generous. And then the last time I saw him in person, it was in the last week of July. He and Wendy came to have lunch with me and a sick friend, and he came orchid in hand, typical Juan, full of love, full of generosity, and, you know, ordering the wine, laughing, talking about their upcoming generation, and sharing that love and heart and beauty and loyalty at a time when I'm sure he could have found something better to do, whether it was packing his suitcase or whatever else. But that sharing and love of beauty will stay with me forever. And the last message I got from him when they were on vacation was, great wine, great food, great birding, good hikes. Talk to you when I get back, right? And I'm very happy that almost those last days were with Wendy, really doing what he wanted to do in that summer, enjoying and sharing that time and having that break that he wanted and so much deserved. Thanks.
Anyone else? Esther, Cecilia? Oh, I'm sorry, Mary Meg, please. Go ahead.
I just want to say a few words. It's hard to follow that, Karen. That was really beautiful. I'm Mary Meg MacArthur from the National Immigrant Justice Center, and we're headquartered in Chicago. So I just want to speak about Juan's visits to the Midwest, because they really meant so much to all of us, to my colleagues in the office, to our clients. He really cared about the people who were being impacted by the immigration court system. And all of us really felt that in our office. When I said, Juan Osuna is coming to visit us, people were thrilled. The conference room was full. And then we talked about our concerns, and he really took them seriously. Our pro bono attorneys were not willing to take the cases because of the backlogs in the immigration courts. And he brainstormed with us, what can we do to fix this? We wrote a white paper. He received that white paper with great interest. And then we got Judge Ann Williams from the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals involved. And I called Juan and I said, Judge Williams really would like to have a conference on case management systems and how the immigration court could apply some of the systems that the federal court uses or utilizes. And he said, sure, I'd be happy to come. And we had this amazing conference, and I think Rebecca Carson's here. She helped organize it. And it was just, he just made it so real, inspirational, hopeful. And that inspiration and that hope continues with me and my colleagues. And Wendy, you continue to embody that. So thank you so much, Don and your team, for organizing this. And it couldn't come at a better time. Juan will continue to be with us. Thank you.
Yes, please. Okay, come on up.
No, up here to be with my sisters.
That's okay. And Esther,
Please.
can I borrow the, I took a picture of something I had written, but I can't read it because my eyesight's failing me. Hi, everybody. So my name is Angie Kelly, and I shouldn't have come as a surprise when Esther said to me about 15 minutes ago, hey, people who've known Juan and Wendy are going to, stand up and speak. Is there, you should be ready to go. And I'm not ready. I don't know if I'd ever be ready to go to say everything that I feel and have in my heart for Juan and Wendy. But I just had a bunch of pictures, right, that just flashed up when you said his name, Esther. And I remembered you two at my wedding. It was the hottest day in June. It was the same year that you guys got married. You thankfully were married in upstate New York. I was married in Virginia. Juan was really sweaty, but he seemed to have a great time. And then a year later, we were at the AILA conference in San Francisco, and O.J. Simpson was in the white Bronco, and we were all like transfixed in front of a television, right? Juan and David Neal and my husband Michael and Wendy and I. And I could just go on about those kind of silly memories. But here's what always struck me is that he never failed to smile and just seemed so happy to see me. He never failed to make me feel like I was the most important person in the room right then, and he just wanted to talk with me and hear how I was doing. Anyway, so there he is, right, as the person that we knew and loved, and as a friend. And I want to read to you guys what I shared with Esther last September about Juan as a person that we worked with. At every hard turn, in every challenging circumstance in government, he was a steady hand we advocates would reach for. He'd probably not like to be compared to Yoda, but there are characteristics, not the appearance, that bear a strong resemblance. He was wise, patient, and defined integrity. To say that Juan was selfless isn't giving him an iota of the credit that he deserves for time and time again being the guy in the room who held the moral compass. That's your husband. Esther, Cecilia, any parting thoughts?
I'll just say one last thing. I suspect I am one of many people in the room who over the last year and a half has either thought or said to someone, we really need to talk to you right now is Juan. I have almost recommended to about a dozen reporters that they call him, and before I remember that it's not possible, but I know we're all feeling the lack of his wisdom right now in this particular moment that we find ourselves in. His wisdom, his perspective, his knowledge, his humor. I find humor is particularly helpful in moments like the ones we find ourselves in. So the way I think about that is that we have to channel Juan. That's up to us now, right? We need what he offered to this field, to this world very much. And so, we all benefited from what he brought to it. We all know what he brought to it. So our job is to bring that to every single one of us.
The other notes I made when the three of us spoke are how I thought I would close this out. Juan was unlike anyone else in government. Having Juan in the room made everyone feel like the most expert person was there. He is the most essential person we no longer have. And I think, I thought of Dawn's comment this morning that Juan had a crazy, infectious smile. And I think for me, he had that, but he had this mischievous twinkle in his eye at all times, and that's what I think about. So thank you all. Thank you all for sharing your reflections and raising up Juan's legacy. And I think, Wendy, are you up next?